At 3 a.m., I woke up to sledgehammers, smashing my great-grandfather's 80-year-old stone bridge to pieces. An HOA Karen who'd moved in just 3 years ago hired a crew in the dead of night, all because she wanted her million-dollar lake view unobstructed. She turned my family's Depression-era craftsmanship into rubble. Huge mistake. What she didn't know? My family still held one forgotten document from 1943, before her fancy neighborhood even existed. One phone call to the right federal authority, and her entire $5 million luxury resort community was about to learn a very expensive lesson. But before I reveal how the oldest family on the lake got the ultimate revenge, have you ever had a neighbor who thought money could rewrite history? Drop a comment telling me your worst HOA nightmare, because sometimes karma just needs the right paperwork. My name's Ezra Blackwood, and I've been an environmental engineer for 22 years, long enough to know that water always finds a way, and that every bully eventually meets their match. That bridge they destroyed? My great-grandfather Silas built it stone by stone in 1943, each piece cut from local quarry rock and fitted by hand during the Great Depression. I can still feel the smooth grooves his chisel left, worn deeper by decades of boots crossing to fish the far shore. The morning mist would cling to those stones like memories, and the sound of water lapping underneath was the heartbeat of my childhood. 4 generations of Blackwoods learned to swim off that bridge. We carved our initials in the cornerstone: SB 1943, JB 1967, RB 1989, and finally EB 2001 when I turned 16. Just 3 years ago, I scattered my father's ashes from its center span, watching them drift downstream like all the stories he'd told me about this place. The 5-acre cabin property came with those memories, plus a shoebox full of yellowed documents I'd never bothered reading. Dad always said, "The important stuff's in the papers, son." But I was too busy with my engineering career in Denver to care about old family business. Then Lakeshire Estates happened. 47 luxury homes sprouted around the lake's north shore like an expensive fungus. Average price? $1.5 million. Average time lived here? 3 years. Average understanding of local history? Absolutely zero. They brought their city attitudes and their oversized boats, turning a quiet fishing lake into their personal playground. Leading this invasion was Vivian Ashworth, former corporate lawyer turned HOA president. Picture that customer who demands the manager, then the district manager, then calls corporate because her latte foam wasn't symmetrical. Now give her a law degree, a $2, $8 million lakefront mansion, and the unshakable belief that money rewrites 80 years of history. My bridge became her personal obsession within 6 months of moving in. It obstructed her sight lines and created navigation hazards for boats that cost more than most people's houses. During our first confrontation, she stood on my property in designer hiking boots that had never seen dirt, pointing a manicured finger at my family's heritage like it was garbage blocking her view. "This eyesore has got to go," she announced, like she was discussing a broken lawn ornament. "It completely ruins the aesthetic of our community waterfront." Our community. Like she'd been here since the Roosevelt administration, instead of since last Tuesday. Her first weapon was Pemberton, Hayes, and Associates, lawyers who charge $800 an hour to explain why your family legacy is actually illegal. They filed papers claiming public safety violations and environmental hazards, despite county engineers confirming the bridge exceeded modern structural standards and posed zero risk to navigation. The harassment campaign began immediately. Anonymous complaints flooded the EPA about unpermitted structures affecting waterways. Daily safety inspections by engineers billing $200 an hour to confirm what everyone already knew. Cease and desist letters arrived weekly like clockwork, each one costing me $400 just to respond through my lawyer. The smell of diesel from their oversized pontoon boats now poisoned morning air that used to carry only pine needles and possibility. The crisp crunch of legal papers under my boots replaced the satisfying thud of stone against stone when I walked the bridge at sunset, checking for damage I knew was coming. The community split like a lightning-struck oak. Old-timers like Dorothy Finch, who'd lived here since Eisenhower was president, rallied behind the bridge. But the mansion crowd? They saw only unobstructed views and rising property values. Nothing more. 3 months cost me $12,000 just to keep what my family had owned for 8 decades. I was hemorrhaging money fighting a woman whose legal budget seemed infinite, all to preserve a bridge that had weathered everything from flash floods to ice storms, without budging an inch. What none of them knew, what I didn't even know until desperation finally made me open Dad's shoebox, was that the Blackwood family didn't just own a bridge. We owned the entire damn lake. Vivian's legal harassment campaign kicked into overdrive the week after our bridge confrontation, and I quickly learned something my engineering professors never taught me. In America, you can weaponize bureaucracy against anyone if you have enough money and zero conscience. Every morning brought fresh torture. Morrison and Associates Engineering showed up daily, billing $200 per hour to examine my bridge like it was a nuclear reactor about to melt down. These guys arrived with clipboards, hard hats, and the kind of manufactured concern that screams, "We're being paid to find problems." Tuesday, potential structural fatigue in support elements. Thursday, questionable load distribution under dynamic loading. Friday, insufficient barrier protection for pedestrian safety. The legal bills mounted like a geometric progression I remembered from calculus class, each week's costs multiplying the previous week's damage. Every cease and desist letter cost me $400 just to respond through Sandra Reeves, my lawyer. Every bogus complaint required professional documentation. Every engineering concern demanded expert rebuttal. What started as a $500 problem became $3,000, then $8,000, then $12,000 in 3 months. I'd seen this tactic before in corporate litigation. Exhaust the opponent's resources until they surrender, regardless of who's right. Vivian was playing financial chess, while I was stuck playing checkers with my savings account. Meanwhile, she launched a propaganda war that would impress Joseph Goebbels. The HOA newsletter featured a front-page spread titled, "Historic Eyesore Threatens Community Safety," complete with professional photography making my family's craftsmanship look like a crumbling Soviet monument. She'd hired someone who specialized in disaster photography, every angle designed to make 80-year-old stonework appear ready to collapse and kill innocent boaters. Her social media blitz was equally vicious. Anonymous Facebook accounts sprouted like mushrooms after rain, posting daily warnings about environmental violations and navigation hazards. The same carefully manipulated photos circulated endlessly, accompanied by breathless captions about dangerous structures and liability nightmares. The crisp rustle of legal papers began replacing the peaceful sound of morning birds outside my kitchen window. Each FedEx delivery felt like another small invasion, another attempt to bury my family's history under an avalanche of billable hours and manufactured outrage. Dorothy Finch, my 78-year-old neighbor who'd crossed that bridge every morning since Johnson was president, stopped her daily walks entirely. "I don't want to give them more ammunition, dear," she whispered, as if Vivian's spies might be listening from the pine trees. Then everything changed on a Thursday morning, when County Engineer Pete Kowalski appeared at my door, looking more curious than hostile. I braced myself for another expensive consultation, another expert opinion about why my great-grandfather's work was somehow deficient by modern standards. Instead, Pete spent 3 hours examining every stone with genuine fascination. He crawled under the span with a flashlight, tested mortar joints, and even brought out digital equipment that looked like something from Star Trek. The metallic ping of his hammer against stone echoed across the lake as he conducted percussion tests on load-bearing elements. Each strike sounded confident, purposeful, nothing like the destructive hammering that would come later. "Blackwood," he said finally, removing his hard hat and shaking his head in amazement. "I've been doing this for 32 years, and your great-grandfather was either a certified genius or the luckiest amateur in construction history." Here it comes, I thought, the condemnation disguised as admiration. "This bridge exceeds modern engineering standards by roughly 300%, Pete continued, running his hands along stonework that had weathered 8 decades without shifting. "The construction techniques are extraordinary, European masonry methods that most modern contractors couldn't duplicate if they tried. This thing could probably survive a direct nuclear strike." His official report became my first real weapon against Vivian's war machine. 16 pages of technical language, essentially declaring, this structure will outlast civilization itself. Every load calculation, every stress analysis, Every safety measurement confirmed what 4 generations of Blackwoods had known by walking across it daily. Armed with Pete's vindication, I launched my counterattack. Sandra helped me compile a harassment complaint, documenting 3 months of legal terrorism, every frivolous inspection, every baseless threat, every abuse of official processes designed to bankrupt me into submission. But Vivian wasn't finished playing dirty. The HOA board voted unanimously to fine me $500 per day for continuing aesthetic violations, money that would accumulate whether I fought the charges or not. Her husband, Reginald, apparently recruited for surveillance duty, was caught photographing my bridge at dawn like some suburban spy. Bird watching, he claimed when confronted, despite pointing a $3,000 telephoto lens at stonework instead of wildlife. The fool panicked and dropped his expensive German camera straight into 10 feet of lake water, creating a splash that probably scared every actual bird within 5 miles. The local newspaper picked up our story with a headline that made my morning coffee taste like sawdust. Historic bridge battle divides mountain community. My family's heritage had become small-town entertainment, with our private dispute transformed into public spectacle. That's when I realized this wasn't about property values or lake views. This was about power, the kind of entitled, toxic power that believes money can rewrite history and terrorize people into forgetting who they are. But Vivian had made one crucial mistake. She assumed that because I was fighting alone, I was fighting without resources. She had no idea what was sitting in that dusty shoebox upstairs. The week after Pete's report vindicated my bridge, Vivian's tactics shifted from legal harassment to outright sabotage. When entitled people can't win through legitimate channels, they start playing by prison rules. It began with accidents that weren't accidents. Monday morning, I discovered the bridge's safety railings loosened with power tools. Professional work, not random vandalism. The bolts lay scattered on stone like metallic confetti, each one carefully removed rather than broken. Tuesday brought mysterious gouges in the support pillars, fresh chisel marks that hadn't existed 24 hours earlier. The acrid smell of metal shavings mixed with morning lake mist told me someone had been busy with industrial equipment while I slept. These weren't teenagers with crowbars. This was calculated destruction, designed to create the safety hazards Vivian's engineers kept failing to find. Wednesday delivered the smoking gun. My security camera captured the HOA maintenance crew accidentally ramming their pontoon boat into my bridge supports during routine lake cleanup. 5 deliberate impacts in broad daylight, each collision sending vibrations through 80-year-old stonework that had never budged an inch. When I confronted Vivian with video evidence, she smiled like a politician, denying obvious corruption, and suggested I file a complaint with their insurance company, the same company that had mysteriously canceled my homeowner's policy the previous week. That's when the mini-twist revealed how deep her corruption network really went. My insurance agent, Mike Torino, delivered the devastating news over coffee that tasted like sawdust. Due to ongoing liability concerns regarding structures on your property, we're unable to continue coverage. His uncomfortable fidgeting told me everything I needed to know about external pressure. 3 phone calls later, I discovered the truth. Vivian's brother-in-law sat on the insurance company's risk assessment board and had personally flagged my account as high risk, requiring immediate policy termination. In the insurance world, this is called redlining, denying coverage based on manufactured risk rather than actual data. What made it criminal was the family connection nobody bothered to disclose. Without homeowners insurance, I couldn't legally maintain a mortgage on property that had been in my family for 8 decades. Vivian wasn't just trying to destroy my bridge. She was attempting to force me into bankruptcy and property seizure. The community fracture deepened like ice, cracking under pressure. Mayor Chuck Hendricks organized a mediation session at the community center, essentially asking Switzerland to negotiate between 2 countries actively lobbing grenades at each other. This is about community standards and property values, Vivian declared to the packed room, gesturing at blown-up photos making my heritage bridge look like a crumbling Soviet monument. We cannot allow individual selfishness to destroy investments for 47 responsible families. The irony was breathtaking. A 3-year resident lecturing locals about community values while systematically destroying the actual community that had existed for decades. My counterattack involved everything I'd learned about environmental compliance during 22 years of engineering. While Vivian focused on destroying my bridge, I'd been documenting her construction projects with forensic thoroughness. Her lakefront dock expansion, built without proper permits and extending beyond legal property boundaries into public waters, a federal violation worth $50,000 in fines. The concrete runoff from their boat launch, directly violating EPA water contamination guidelines in a protected watershed. Their decorative retaining walls, installed without environmental impact studies, threatening fish spawning areas that had been protected since 1987. I submitted my findings to the State Environmental Agency with color photographs, GPS coordinates, water quality measurements, and enough technical violations to make regulators drool. The beautiful irony of turning bureaucratic weapons against their original wielder tasted sweeter than victory champagne. But Vivian's most pathetic move came Thursday evening, when she organized a bridge awareness walk featuring yoga mats, champagne, and mindful reflection on community harmony. The event attracted exactly 3 attendees, plus one confused golden retriever who kept trying to drink from the crystal glasses. Watching her lead breathing exercises for an audience of almost nobody, while spending $500 on catered refreshments, was like witnessing someone throw an elaborate birthday party in an empty room. The stakes escalated dangerously when anonymous social media accounts began posting my home address, alongside inflammatory accusations about dangerous engineers and environmental terrorists. Someone slashed my truck tires in the supermarket parking lot, leaving 4 flat Michelins and a note reading, "Bridge lovers get what they deserve." The county received a formal petition demanding immediate bridge removal, signed by 127 people, though something felt wrong about the handwriting similarities and the suspicious number of signatures from people Dorothy later confirmed had been dead for over a decade. That's when Dorothy Finch revealed her secret weapon. "Honey, I didn't just retire as county clerk," she said, appearing at my door with a manila folder thick enough to stop bullets. "I was the county clerk who filed every important document that crossed this desk for 38 years, including some papers about your family that everybody forgot existed." Her eyes twinkled with the satisfaction of someone who'd been waiting decades to deploy the perfect bureaucratic nuclear weapon. "Your great-grandfather was a very thorough man when it came to paperwork. Very thorough indeed." Friday morning brought Vivian's nuclear option. She arrived at my property with 2 private security guards and a document that redefined the concept of manufactured authority. "Mr. Blackwood," she announced, stepping onto my land like conquering royalty, "you're in violation of Emergency Safety Ordinance 127B, passed last night in executive session. This bridge poses an immediate threat to community welfare. Emergency Safety Ordinance 127B, created in a secret HOA meeting I wasn't invited to, concerning property outside their jurisdiction, voted on by people who'd never crossed my bridge or understood its history." The security guards flanked her like discount Secret Service agents, hands hovering near pepper spray canisters that probably cost more than their weekly salaries. The larger one, built like a refrigerator with anger management issues, actually attempted to place me under citizen's arrest for obstruction of community safety operations. I'd witnessed some spectacular power trips during 2 decades of engineering projects, but watching a 3-year resident try to arrest someone whose family predated her neighborhood by 60 years redefined audacity itself. "Ma'am, this is private property," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady while my blood pressure climbed toward dangerous territory. "Not under emergency authority," she replied, waving papers that looked official to someone who'd never read actual legal documents. "We're placing this structure under protective custody, pending immediate demolition." That's when everything changed with a single phone call. My security camera footage had found its way to KPNT News, probably courtesy of Dorothy's mysterious connections, and suddenly, our small-town bridge battle became regional entertainment. The video showed everything: Vivian's manufactured legal authority, the intimidation tactics, her complete disregard for property law basics. But the mini twist that blindsided everyone was the public reaction. Within 12 hours, the clip exploded across social media with 75,000 views and climbing. Comments ranged from supportive, David versus Goliath in the mountains, to absolutely savage, Someone needs to tell Karen that buying expensive property doesn't make you queen of the lake. More importantly, 3 other families came forward with similar stories. Targeted harassment campaigns that had forced them to sell properties after months of legal terrorism. Vivian's community improvement efforts suddenly looked like a systematic pattern of wealthy newcomers driving out longtime residents. The attention attracted Rebecca Martinez, an investigative journalist who specialized in municipal corruption. Rebecca had the hungry look of someone who'd discovered a Pulitzer Prize hiding among pine trees and manufactured neighborhood drama. "This isn't just about your bridge," she told me over coffee that tasted like vindication. "This is about using bureaucratic weapons to ethnically cleanse communities of anyone who doesn't fit the luxury demographic." But viral fame comes with dangerous side effects. The anonymous threats escalated from property damage to personal surveillance. Photographs of me appeared online. Grocery shopping, getting gas, checking mail, accompanied by messages like, "Bridges aren't the only things that can be demolished," and "Mountain Boy needs to learn his place." Living under constant observation felt like being trapped in a fishbowl operated by people who wanted to watch you break. Every public appearance became an exercise in paranoia. Every nighttime noise triggered fight or flight responses that left me exhausted and jumpy. Meanwhile, Vivian deployed her ultimate weapon. Thursday brought news that made my hands shake. She'd filed an emergency injunction seeking immediate bridge removal, claiming imminent collapse threatening public safety and environmental disaster. Judge Harrison Mills scheduled the hearing for Friday afternoon, 7 days to prepare a defense against 80 years of family history being erased by judicial decree. Sandra worked overtime preparing our response, but we both knew the legal landscape favored whoever could afford the most expensive arguments. My $27,000 in legal bills looked pathetic compared to Vivian's seemingly unlimited budget for manufactured emergencies. That's when I finally explored Dad's shoebox completely. Not just the surface documents I'd glanced at, but everything buried underneath layers of family history. Birth certificates, mining claims, federal permits, and hand-drawn maps that made my engineering brain start recognizing patterns I'd missed before. Dorothy had been right about great-grandfather Silas being thorough with paperwork. What she hadn't mentioned was exactly how thorough, or what kind of authority those forgotten documents actually contained. Standing at my kitchen window that night, staring across moonlit water toward luxury homes that existed because of infrastructure they'd never bothered to understand, I realized something that changed everything. I wasn't just defending my family's bridge anymore. I was sitting on the power to redefine their entire world. But first, I had to survive Friday's court hearing without revealing the ace I'd discovered hidden in 80 years of yellowed paper and my great-grandfather's methodical attention to detail. Friday morning, while Sandra prepared for the court hearing that could destroy my family's legacy, I sat in my kitchen with Dad's shoebox contents spread across the table like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle I'd ignored for 3 years. The document that shattered everything was buried beneath decades of property tax receipts and faded photographs. A single sheet of federal letterhead dated March 15, 1943, with an official seal that made my coffee cup rattle against the saucer when I set it down. Federal permit for construction and operation of water control structure, Copper Creek Valley, Colorado. The crisp rustle of 80-year-old paper filled the silence as I read language that had been gathering dust while Vivian orchestrated my destruction. In consideration of wartime infrastructure requirements, the Blackwood family is hereby granted exclusive and perpetual authority for construction, operation, and maintenance of dam facilities, including water flow regulation, level control, and emergency drainage procedures. Exclusive and perpetual. Not shared, not conditional, not subject to future municipal oversight. Forever. My engineering background helped me understand what Silas had actually built. This wasn't just some Depression-era mining dam. It was a sophisticated water control system with manually operated gates, overflow channels, and emergency release capacity designed to empty the entire valley in under 72 hours if necessary. The technical drawings showed remarkable foresight, hand crank mechanisms that bypassed any electrical systems, multiple redundant release channels, flow calculations that accounted for downstream flooding prevention. My great-grandfather had engineered a system that could function during wartime, natural disasters, or complete infrastructure failure. In layman's terms, I could turn Copper Lake into a muddy crater whenever I wanted, and nobody could legally stop me. The power shift was so dramatic, I felt physically nauseated. Every luxury home in Lakeshore Estates existed because my family maintained water levels they'd assumed were natural and permanent. Their mortgages, insurance policies, and property valuations all depended on a lake that existed only through Blackwood family engineering. I'd been fighting a bridge battle while holding the power to eliminate their entire world. But the real bombshell was in subsection 12. Said authority supersedes all future municipal, county, state, or federal jurisdiction, except in cases of declared national emergency or wartime resource allocation. This permit predated every environmental regulation, every zoning ordinance, every HOA charter in existence. Under federal water rights law, older permits automatically take precedence over newer regulations, a principle established to protect agricultural and mining operations from being legislated out of existence by later development. The moral implications hit like a sledgehammer to the chest. 47 families had invested everything in lakefront dreams, without knowing their paradise existed at my discretion. Children learned to swim in water I could drain with a phone call. Elderly couples watched sunsets over a lake that was essentially my family's private swimming pool. Sandra arrived within 20 minutes of my panicked phone call and spent an hour reading the federal permit with laser focus that lawyers reserve for documents that redefine reality. "Jesus Christ, Ezra," she whispered, which was the first time I'd heard her use profanity in 5 years of professional interaction. This gives you authority that supersedes not just the HOA, but every level of government short of a presidential emergency declaration. The weight of that responsibility felt like carrying plutonium in my bare hands. The environmental guilt was equally crushing. Draining Copper Lake would temporarily displace fish populations that had thrived for 8 decades. Decades of accumulated sediment would be exposed, requiring eventual cleanup. Wildlife migration patterns would be disrupted. As someone who'd spent his career protecting ecosystems, the idea of causing that damage, even temporarily, felt like betraying everything I believed in. Yet the alternative was watching Judge Mills rule that my family's 80-year heritage constituted a public safety hazard, requiring immediate destruction. Dorothy appeared at my kitchen door like she'd sensed the cosmic shift happening inside my house. Her knowing expression confirmed she'd been aware of this nuclear option all along. "Your great-grandfather made me promise to only mention those documents if the family faced real destruction," she said, settling into Dad's chair with the familiarity of someone who'd kept this secret for decades. He was terrified future generations might abuse that kind of power. "Dorothy, using this could destroy innocent families." "Sweetie," she replied, eyes twinkling with 8 decades of accumulated wisdom, "sometimes you have to remind people that the water they take for granted doesn't belong to them." The court hearing loomed at 2 p.m., 4 hours to decide whether to deploy the nuclear option that would end Vivian's campaign forever, or watch my bridge disappear under a judge's gavel. Either choice would change Copper Lake forever. The court hearing was 4 hours away, and I faced a choice that would either save my family's legacy or transform me into someone who destroys entire communities for revenge. But first, I needed to understand exactly what weapon my great-grandfather had left me. The drive to the dam site felt like a pilgrimage through 80 years of family history. The overgrown access road that Silas had carved through virgin pine forest wound through aspens whose golden leaves crunched under my boots like scattered coins. The structure itself sat quietly in morning shadows, looking deceptively simple, concrete and stone that had weathered everything from flash floods to economic depression without surrendering an inch. The manual gate control shed smelled like machine oil and decades of patient maintenance. Hand crank wheels connected to steel cables that controlled massive underwater gates. Everything built with wartime paranoia and Depression-era durability. No computers, no electronics, no vulnerability to power outages or cyber attacks, just mechanical advantage and human determination. I called Frank Torino, the retired machinist who'd helped Dad service these systems back when people still remembered what they were for. Frank arrived within an hour, examining the mechanisms with the reverence mechanics reserve for truly exceptional engineering. "Your great-grandfather was either paranoid or brilliant," Frank said, testing cable tension with hands that understood machinery like poets understand words. "Probably both. This system could empty the lake in 60 hours flat, or release water so slowly it'd take half a year, All depends on which gates you open and how far you crank them. The mathematical elegance was beautiful in its simplicity. Full drainage would drop water levels 18 feet in 72 hours, enough to strand every luxury boat and expose every expensive dock, while preventing downstream flooding that could trigger federal intervention. Partial release could create gradual decline that looked like natural drought until property values collapsed and insurance companies started asking uncomfortable questions. Here's what most people don't understand about federal water rights. They operate on a first-in-time, first-in-right principle that makes older permits virtually untouchable. Any water use established before 1950 automatically supersedes newer developments, regardless of economic impact or political pressure. It's legal protection designed to prevent agricultural operations from being legislated out of existence by later suburban sprawl. Frank spent 3 hours servicing gate mechanisms that groaned like sleeping giants, awakening after decades of neglect. The metallic screech of long, unused gears echoed across water that had no idea its future hung in the balance. "You planning some kind of maintenance operation?" Frank asked, wiping decades of accumulated grease from components that could reshape the local economy. "Depends on how court goes this afternoon," I replied, watching him test emergency override systems that could function even if someone tried to sabotage the primary controls. While Frank worked, I researched legal precedents that would protect any action I might take. Water rights cases dating back to the 1800s established that interference with legitimate dam operations constitutes federal crime, regardless of local economic consequences. My permit wasn't just old, it was constitutional-level protection wrapped in Silas's methodical handwriting. The responsibility felt like carrying unstable explosives through a crowded room. I called Dr. Elena Vasquez, the pediatrician from Lakeshire, who'd quietly opposed Vivian's extremist campaign. Elena represented the reasonable people caught between my heritage and their home values, families who deserved warning about what might happen if diplomacy failed completely. "Elena, I need you to understand something that could become very public very soon," I said, choosing words like diffusing a live bomb. "My family holds federal authority over lake water levels that predates your entire neighborhood." The silence lasted long enough for me to wonder if she'd hung up in disbelief. "Are you saying you could actually drain Copper Lake?" she asked finally, voice tight with implications she was just beginning to grasp. "I'm saying that people who spend 3 years trying to destroy someone's family heritage might discover their paradise isn't as permanent as expensive lawyers claim it is." Elena's sharp breath told me she understood perfectly. 47 mortgages secured by permanent waterfront guarantees, insurance policies requiring specific water levels, property investments based on assumptions nobody had bothered to verify. But even as I explained the nuclear option, moral weight pressed down like a physical burden. Many Lakeshire residents were just families who'd bought expensive dreams without understanding the forgotten infrastructure supporting them. The plan forming in my mind was surgical demonstration rather than total destruction. Lower water levels enough to expose the reality of their situation, then negotiate from unassailable strength. Prove the point that couldn't be argued in court or dismissed with manufactured legal authority. Environmental monitoring equipment arrived via overnight shipping. Sensors that would document every aspect of temporary drainage, minimizing ecosystem impact while proving I could control their world with mechanical precision that lawyers couldn't touch. At 1:30 p.m., I sat outside the courthouse in my truck, hands steady on the steering wheel, watching Sandra enter a hearing that would determine whether I deployed the ultimate leverage or watched my great-grandfather's bridge disappear under the weight of entitled ignorance. The mechanical taste of adrenaline mixed with morning coffee as I waited for the phone call that would change everything. By sunset, either diplomacy would prevail or 47 luxury families would discover that their million-dollar paradise existed only because someone they'd terrorized for 3 years had chosen to be generous with power they'd never imagined. That generosity was about to be tested in ways that would reshape everything. The phone call came at 3:47 p.m., just as I was testing the dam gate mechanisms one final time. Sandra's voice carried the weight of total defeat, wrapped in legal terminology. "Emergency injunction granted," she said, each word hitting like a physical blow. "Judge Mills ruled the bridge poses imminent public safety threat requiring immediate removal. Demolition authorized to begin Monday morning." My family's 80-year legacy had just been sentenced to death by a judge who'd probably never set foot on the structure he was condemning. 3 days to watch everything my great-grandfather built get reduced to expensive rubble by people who'd lived here since last Tuesday. But the real bombshell was what Sandra discovered after the hearing. "Ezra, I need to tell you something that changes everything," she continued, voice dropping to whisper level despite being alone in her car. I overheard Vivian talking to her lawyer outside the courthouse. She tried to bribe Judge Mills at the country club last week, offered to finance his re-election campaign in exchange for favorable ruling. The corruption ran deeper than I'd imagined. This wasn't just about property values or aesthetic preferences. It was about someone willing to buy judicial decisions to eliminate obstacles to her personal empire. "There's more," Sandra said. "I filed a Public Records Act request for HOA finances last month. Want to know what I found?" The documents Sandra had uncovered painted a picture of systematic financial terrorism. 3 families had been forced to sell their properties after targeted harassment campaigns identical to mine. Legal fees, frivolous inspections, manufactured emergencies designed to bankrupt people into submission. But here's what most people don't understand about harassment lawsuits. They're not designed to be won. They're designed to be expensive. The goal is financial exhaustion, not legal victory. Even frivolous cases can cost defendants tens of thousands in legal fees, regardless of outcome. Vivian's campaign followed a precise playbook. First, manufacture a crisis, requiring expensive professional response. Second, escalate legal complexity until costs become unsustainable. Third, offer to settle by purchasing the targeted property at below-market rates. It was legal extortion, disguised as community improvement. The families who'd surrendered hadn't lost because they were wrong. They'd lost because they couldn't afford to be right for long enough to prove it. That revelation made my blood taste like copper pennies and righteous fury. But Vivian's desperation was escalating beyond legal maneuvering into outright criminal territory. Sandra had more disturbing news from her courthouse reconnaissance. She approached Pete Kowalski in the parking lot after the hearing, Sandra reported, offered him $5,000 cash to revise his engineering report about your bridge. When he refused, she threatened to get him fired through her connections at the county commissioner's office. Pete had reported the bribery attempt to Sheriff Ray Morrison, even agreeing to wear a wire for a second meeting. The recording captured Vivian explicitly offering cash payments for false testimony, plus threats of professional retaliation if he refused to cooperate. In legal terms, she just committed felony bribery and witness intimidation, crimes that carried actual prison time, not just financial penalties. Meanwhile, her propaganda campaign reached new levels of manufactured hysteria. Professional PR firm Masterson and Associates had been hired to discredit my engineering credentials through selective editing and strategic omission. Social media accounts began spreading rumors about my history of mental instability and dangerous obsession with explosives. The smear included fake stories about me, threatening to blow up the dam, and making terrorist statements about destroying the community. None of it was true, but lies travel faster than facts when they're professionally packaged and strategically distributed. Anonymous flyers appeared throughout town, featuring my photograph alongside headlines like "Dangerous Engineer Threatens Community Safety" and "Mental Breakdown or Terrorist Plot." The same manipulative photography techniques that made my bridge look dangerous now made me look like a deranged domestic terrorist. The psychological warfare was taking its toll. Every public appearance triggered anxiety about who might be photographing me for the next round of character assassination. Every phone call after dark made my heart race. Every slow-moving car past my property activated fight-or-flight responses that left me exhausted. But I wasn't the only one feeling pressure. Dorothy reported that several Lakeshore residents had privately begun questioning Vivian's leadership after the bribery allegations surfaced. Dr. Elena Vasquez had called an informal meeting of moderate voices seeking compromise solutions. The community was fracturing along lines of basic decency versus blind loyalty to property values. That evening, I made the decision that would change everything. Standing at the dam control shed as sunset painted the lake gold and crimson, I placed my hands on the gate wheels that could reshape 47 lives in 72 hours. Frank had left detailed instructions for controlled drainage, precise calculations for water release that would demonstrate power without causing permanent environmental damage. Open gates to 30% capacity, maintain steady flow, monitor downstream impact every 4 hours. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Begin drainage Thursday morning after court deadline passed. Drop water levels 18 feet over 3 days, stranding boats and exposing docks. Document everything with environmental monitoring equipment to prove minimal ecosystem impact. Force negotiations from position of undeniable strength. Monday morning, Vivian's demolition crew would arrive to destroy my bridge. Thursday morning, their luxury paradise would begin disappearing, drop by calculated drop. Sometimes the most powerful response to manufactured crisis is demonstrating who actually controls the situation. I cranked the first gate wheel counterclockwise exactly 6 full turns, feeling steel cables engage mechanisms that had waited 80 years for this moment. The sound of rushing water began immediately, not the roar of catastrophic failure, but the steady whisper of controlled release that would quietly drain their world while they slept. By morning, Copper Lake would be 6 inches lower, and nobody would notice yet. By Friday, they'd understand exactly who held the real power in this community. Monday morning arrived with the mechanical scream of diesel engines and professional demolition equipment positioning around my family's bridge, like an execution squad preparing for a state-sanctioned murder. Vivian stood on the shore, directing operations with the satisfaction of someone who'd just purchased her neighbor's destruction through judicial decree. The crew she'd hired, Destructive Solutions LLC, specialized in making inconvenient history disappear for people wealthy enough to afford manufactured emergencies. I watched from my kitchen window as they set up equipment worth more than most people's houses, all dedicated to reducing 80 years of craftsmanship to expensive rubble. The irony was spectacular, spending $50,000 to destroy something that had cost my great-grandfather 6 months of Depression-era labor and a lifetime of pride. But Vivian had made one crucial miscalculation. She assumed victory in court meant victory in reality. The demolition crew's first challenge came when they discovered the bridge's construction exceeded their equipment capabilities. Silas hadn't just built a bridge. He'd engineered a fortress that laughed at modern wrecking tools. Their hydraulic hammers bounced off stonework like toys attacking a mountain. Concrete saws overheated trying to cut through mortar that had been mixed with techniques lost when craftsmen started prioritizing speed over permanence. After 6 hours of professional destruction, they'd managed to chip exactly one decorative corner piece. The foreman, a guy built like a bulldozer with anger management issues, called time out to reassess their approach. "Ma'am, this structure is built like a bomb shelter. We're going to need specialized equipment, and probably twice as long as estimated." Vivian's face cycled through expressions ranging from disbelief to rage to the kind of entitled fury that rich people display when money fails to instantly solve problems. "I don't care what it costs," she declared, pulling out her phone to demand solutions that physics wouldn't provide. "That bridge disappears by Friday, or everyone gets fired." Meanwhile, I was implementing my own timeline on a completely different schedule. Thursday morning, exactly 72 hours after I'd opened the first dam gate, Copper Lake had dropped 18 inches. Still not enough for casual observers to notice, but sufficient to make boat docks feel slightly higher and swimming areas seem shallower. Frank had taught me to think in terms of psychological impact rather than dramatic spectacle. Sudden catastrophic drainage would trigger emergency response and federal investigation. Gradual, controlled release that appeared natural would create doubt, concern, and eventually panic without providing legal targets for retaliation. The beauty was in the precision. 6 more inches every 12 hours, steady as clockwork, invisible unless you knew what to measure. By Friday, their luxury boats would be sitting in mud while their property values evaporated faster than morning mist. But Vivian's desperation was escalating beyond legal maneuvering into genuinely criminal territory that made her previous corruption look like jaywalking. Sheriff Morrison called Thursday afternoon with news that changed everything. "Ezra, we've got a problem. Vivian just tried to hire someone to sabotage your property. Guy she approached happened to be an undercover state investigator working on municipal corruption cases." The recording was devastating. Vivian explicitly offering $15,000 for accidents that would force me to abandon the property, cut power lines, contaminate well water, maybe a small fire in the cabin while I was away. Nothing that would seriously hurt anyone, just enough property damage to make living there impossible. In legal terms, she'd graduated from bribery and harassment to criminal conspiracy and solicitation of arson. Federal crimes that carried mandatory prison sentences, not slap-on-the-wrist fines that rich people consider business expenses. She also made some interesting comments about having people in Denver who could make your engineering license disappear if you don't cooperate, Morrison added. We're looking into whether that constitutes additional witness intimidation charges. The corruption network was unraveling like cheap rope under pressure, revealing connections that reached far beyond our small mountain community. Meanwhile, the environmental monitoring equipment I'd installed was documenting everything with scientific precision. Water quality remained stable, fish populations were adapting normally to changing levels, and downstream flow rates stayed within acceptable parameters for irrigation and municipal use. As an engineer, I felt professionally satisfied that controlled drainage was proceeding exactly according to calculations. As a human being, I felt increasingly guilty about the innocent families who'd wake up Friday morning to discover their paradise disappearing. Dr. Elena Vasquez called Thursday evening with a voice tight with barely contained panic. Ezra, something's wrong with the lake. Our boat dock is 3 feet higher than yesterday, and our neighbors are asking if we've noticed the water level dropping. Please tell me this isn't what you meant about your family controlling water levels. The moment of truth had arrived. Either I revealed the nuclear option that would end this war permanently, or I continued the charade that might destroy people who didn't deserve punishment for Vivian's crimes. Elena, gather every reasonable person in Lakeshire who wants to avoid catastrophe. Meet me at the community center tomorrow morning at 9. Friday morning would bring the public revelation that changed everything. 47 luxury families were about to discover that their million-dollar paradise existed only because someone they'd spent 3 years terrorizing had chosen to be generous with power they'd never imagined. That generosity was about to end permanently, unless wisdom prevailed over entitlement in the next 18 hours. The demolition crew would arrive to finish destroying my bridge, and they'd find their luxury community disappearing, drop by calculated drop. Friday morning, 9 a.m. sharp, I stood before a packed community center audience that included 47 terrified Lakeshire residents, 3 news crews, Sheriff Morrison, Mayor Hendricks, and one very pale Vivian Ashworth, who was finally beginning to understand that money doesn't control everything. The lake behind me had dropped 4 feet overnight, enough to strand every luxury boat and expose dock pilings that hadn't seen daylight since the Carter administration. What had been subtle decline was now undeniable catastrophe, and nobody could explain what was happening, except the man they'd spent 3 years trying to destroy. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, holding up the yellowed federal permit that was about to rewrite local history. I'd like to introduce you to the legal document that created your paradise, and the authority that can take it away. The audience silence felt like the moment before lightning strikes. My name is Ezra Blackwood, and my great-grandfather Silas built the dam that creates Copper Lake in 1943, under federal permit that grants our family exclusive water control authority in perpetuity. Every drop of water keeping your properties valuable flows through gates operated under laws that predate your neighborhood by 6 decades. Dr. Elena Vasquez raised her hand like a student asking permission to question reality. Are you saying you've been draining our lake deliberately? I'm saying that people who spend 3 years trying to destroy someone's heritage might eventually discover their luxury paradise isn't as permanent as expensive lawyers claim. The mathematical beauty of controlled drainage had become undeniable overnight. Time-lapse cameras captured 72 hours of steady water loss, precise flow rates, environmental monitoring data that proved minimal ecosystem damage. Everything documented with engineering precision that couldn't be dismissed as vandalism or natural phenomenon. Vivian finally found her voice, though it cracked with the kind of panic that rich people experience when money fails to solve existential problems. "This is terrorism!" she screamed, pointing at me like I was personally responsible for gravity and entropy. "You can't destroy an entire community because of one disagreement." "One disagreement?" I laughed, pulling out 3 thick folders of documentation. "You filed 47 frivolous complaints, hired demolition crews to destroy heritage property, attempted to bribe county officials, and solicited criminal conspiracy to force me off land my family has owned since before your parents were born. Sheriff Morrison stepped forward with handcuffs that gleamed like justice in the morning light. "Speaking of criminal conspiracy," he announced, "Vivian Ashworth, you're under arrest for attempted bribery, witness intimidation, and solicitation of arson. You have the right to remain silent, though that would be a significant departure from your usual behavior." The audience gasped collectively as Morrison read Miranda rights to someone who'd assumed wealth provided immunity from consequences. The sound of metal handcuffs clicking shut echoed across the room like a judge's gavel delivering final verdict. Federal water engineer Dr. James Patterson had driven down from Denver after reviewing my permit documentation. He confirmed what everyone was just beginning to grasp. Mr. Blackwood's authority supersedes all local jurisdiction. His family's water rights are constitutionally protected and legally unassailable. The environmental impact assessment was equally reassuring. Fish populations had successfully migrated to deeper areas, water quality remained stable, and controlled drainage posed no threat to downstream communities. Professional management of temporary water reduction, not environmental vandalism. But the real mic drop moment came when I revealed the restoration timeline. "Here's what happens next," I announced, spreading detailed engineering plans across the podium. "Your new HOA board, the one that will replace Vivian's criminal enterprise, signs a permanent protection agreement for my family's bridge. You commit in writing to ending harassment of longtime residents. You establish a heritage preservation fund, managed by people who actually understand local history." The room felt like church during confession, as everyone contemplated sins they hadn't realized they were committing. "In exchange, I'll close the dam gates tomorrow morning and restore full water levels within 72 hours. Your boats float again, your docks return to normal, and your property values recover from this educational experience." Dr. Elena Vasquez stood up with tears streaming down her face. "Mr. Blackwood, I want to personally apologize for everything our community has put you through. We never understood what we were really attacking." The standing ovation that followed felt like redemption wrapped in applause. Person after person stood to condemn Vivian's campaign and pledge support for peaceful coexistence based on mutual respect rather than financial intimidation. Mayor Hendricks stepped to the podium with papers already prepared. "By emergency municipal authority, I'm declaring the Blackwood Bridge a protected historic landmark. Anyone attempting future interference will face federal charges for destroying heritage property." The demolition crew that had spent a week trying to destroy 80 years of craftsmanship was now packing their equipment in defeat. Silas's stonework had outlasted their best efforts and would continue standing long after everyone in this room joined him in whatever engineers do after death. But the sweetest moment came when Reginald Ashworth, Vivian's hapless husband, approached with his checkbook open and desperation written across his face like a confession. "Mr. Blackwood, would you consider selling us those floating decorations I bought for Lakefest? Slightly used, but they might work for our bankruptcy auction next month." Even in victory, some ironies are too perfect to ruin with commentary. As news crews packed their equipment and Lakeshire residents filed out to examine their slowly refilling paradise, I stood on the bridge my great-grandfather built and felt the satisfaction of battles won through patience rather than anger, wisdom rather than revenge. Sometimes, the most powerful weapon isn't the one that destroys your enemies. It's the one that teaches them why they needed your generosity in the first place. 6 months later, I'm writing this story from the same kitchen where I discovered the federal permit that changed everything. Watching sunrise paint Copper Lake the same gold and crimson colors my great-grandfather saw when he built our bridge stone by patient stone. The lake refill took exactly 71 hours, just as Frank's calculations predicted. By Sunday evening, every boat was floating, every dock was functional, and 47 families had learned an expensive lesson about the difference between owning property and understanding the infrastructure that makes it valuable. Vivian received 18 months in federal prison for bribery, conspiracy, and witness intimidation, crimes that follow you regardless of how many expensive lawyers claim money solves everything. Her mansion sold at foreclosure auction for $1.2 million, roughly half what she'd paid during her brief reign as neighborhood dictator. The new owners, a retired teacher and her veteran husband, introduced themselves by walking across my bridge to ask permission, something Vivian never bothered with during 3 years of legal terrorism. Dr. Elena Vasquez was elected HOA president unanimously, running on a platform of cooperation over litigation that would have been revolutionary 6 months earlier. Her first official act was commissioning a bronze plaque for the bridge. Silas Blackwood Memorial Crossing, built 1943, protected forever. The Heritage Preservation Fund she established now provides scholarships for local students pursuing engineering education. This year's recipient is Dorothy Finch's great-granddaughter, a brilliant kid who wants to study environmental engineering and build things that last as long as Mr. Silas's bridge. My legal bills, $37,000 by final tally, were reimbursed through the HOA settlement fund, along with compensation for 3 years of harassment that no amount of money could fully address. More importantly, similar campaigns targeting other longtime residents stopped immediately once word spread about federal water rights and their tendency to humble entitled neighbors. The community dynamics shifted like a river changing course after spring flooding. Monthly dinners at the community center now feature longtime locals sharing history with newcomers who genuinely want to understand what they'd bought into. Children from Lakeshore families learn to fish from the same bridge where 4 generations of Blackwoods carved their initials in weathered stone. Frank Torino accepted appointment as official dam keeper with a ceremonial title and actual authority to maintain systems most people had forgotten existed. He takes the responsibility seriously, testing mechanisms monthly and training a crew of local teenagers in water management techniques their great-grandparents would recognize. The environmental monitoring equipment remains in place, documenting seasonal water patterns and wildlife adaptation that provides valuable research data for the university's new Lake Ecosystem Study program. Controlled drainage that looked like potential disaster became a case study in responsible water management during changing climate conditions. Dorothy Finch published her local history book, When the Lake Was Young, Stories from Copper Creek Valley, featuring the Blackwood family's water engineering, alongside tales of mining camps, early settlers, and the gradual transformation from frontier wilderness to luxury resort community. It's become required reading for new residents who want to understand their expensive paradise. But the sweetest resolution involves relationships healed through mutual understanding, rather than legal victory. Reginald Ashworth, Vivian's former husband, who'd survived his wife's criminal enterprises through strategic incompetence, started a successful consulting business, helping mountain communities identify and resolve water rights issues before they explode into expensive conflicts. Turns out there are a lot of forgotten permits and overlooked authorities that could surprise people, he told me over coffee at Pike's Bait Shop, which removed their No HOA Members sign after the community reconciliation. The bridge itself has become a tourist attraction for heritage photography and family fishing expeditions. Visitors arrive specifically to see the bridge that couldn't be bought and hear stories about Depression-era craftsmanship that outlasted modern demolition equipment. More importantly, it remains what Silas intended, a connection between past and present, family and community, the kind of enduring infrastructure that serves generations instead of quarterly profit reports. Last week, my 8-year-old nephew Tommy helped me place fresh flowers at the bridge cornerstone, where great-grandfather's initials remain clearly visible despite 8 decades of weather. Tommy traced the carved letters with small fingers, while asking questions about family history and engineering principles that would make Silas proud. "Uncle Ezra," he said, "when I grow up, can I help take care of the bridge too?" "Absolutely, buddy. That's how it works. Each generation teaches the next one why some things are worth preserving." As I finish writing this account, I'm reminded that the most satisfying victories aren't the ones that destroy your opponents, but the ones that teach everyone involved why cooperation serves communities better than conquest. If you've got an HOA nightmare story that makes Vivian look reasonable, drop it in the comments below. I read every single one, and the wildest tales might inspire future accounts of justice, served with engineering precision. And if you enjoyed watching entitled bullies discover that money doesn't control everything, hit that subscribe button. I've got a whole collection of David versus Goliath stories, where patience, preparation, and forgotten paperwork prove more powerful than expensive lawyers and manufactured emergencies. Sometimes, the best revenge is simply reminding people who was there first, and why they should have been grateful for your generosity while it lasted. The old-timers always win eventually. We just take our time about it.